My dad's tears when my queen called him father. It was a quiet afternoon, sunlight spilling through the living room windows, the air filled with the smell of fresh tea. My dad was sitting in his favorite chair, the one that had seen countless evenings of family talks and quiet moments. He didn't know today would be different. She walked in slowly, carrying a small tray of snacks she had helped prepare. My dad looked up with a polite smile, the kind he gives to someone he respects, but still sees as new to the family. But then, instead of just handing him the plate, she knelt slightly, looked straight at him, and said softly, "Here you go, father." The word hung in the air, like a warm blanket. It wasn't forced. It was spoken with real feeling, as if she had been holding it in for the right moment. I watched my dad's expression change. At first, he blinked, like he wasn't sure if he'd heard correctly. Then his lips trembled, and his eyes began to glisten. It wasn't just a word to him. It was acceptance. It was her telling him, without a speech, that she saw him as more than my dad. He put the plate down without even tasting the food, reached forward and gently held her hands. His voice cracked as he said, "No one's ever called me that, not like this." That's when the tears came. Slow, quiet, and impossible to hide. I knew then that something had shifted between them forever. My dad took a deep breath, still holding her hands, like they were the most precious thing in the world. His eyes were red, but there was a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You don't know what you just did," he said in a low voice. "You don't know how much that means to me." She looked a little confused, tilting her head gently, but she stayed quiet, letting him speak. "When your own children call you father, it's beautiful, yes, but it's expected," he continued. "They're your blood, they're born into it. But when someone who doesn't have to, someone who can choose, calls you father, that's a gift. That's a bond you can't buy or force." She blinked, and I could see her eyes beginning to water too. My dad's thumb brushed over her knuckles, like he was making sure. She knew he was speaking from the deepest part of his heart. He told her how in his younger years, he always wondered what it would be like to have not just a daughter, but a daughter-in-law who truly treated him like her own dad. Not just in words, but in respect, in care, and in the small things, like remembering how he takes his tea, or checking if he's feeling well, without being asked. And today he said, his voice breaking again, "You made me feel that dream come true." She couldn't hold back anymore. She leaned forward and hugged him. The kind of hug that isn't quick or polite, but slow and full of warmth. My dad held her like he had known her all his life. And, as I stood there watching them, I realized this wasn't just about marriage anymore. This was about family. Real family. Built not by blood alone, but by choice and love. She slowly pulled back from the hug, still holding onto his arms, as if she didn't want to let go completely. Her voice was soft but steady. When she finally spoke, "I didn't call you father just because I married your son," she said, her eyes glistening. "I called you father because you've been one to me long before that." My dad looked at her like he was trying to process every word. She went on, telling him about the first time they met, how he had asked her if she'd eaten before he even asked her name, how he made her laugh with a small joke just to ease her nerves, how he never treated her like an outsider, not even for a second. She told him about the little moments that had stuck with her. The time he fixed a loose button on her coat without saying a word. The way he defended her when someone spoke harshly about her. The way he always made sure she was part of every family photo. "I've had respect for you since the first day," she said. "But somewhere along the way, I started feeling like you were already my dad. I just never said it out loud until today. My dad's lips trembled. He looked down, took his glasses off, and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You didn't just marry into this family, he whispered. You are this family. Her smile widened, and she nodded. Then it's only right I call you what you truly are to me, Father. The room was quiet for a few moments, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty, because of the emotions it carries. I watched as my dad reached out, placed his hand gently on her head like a blessing, and said, my dad stood there for a few seconds, his hand still resting on her head, like he was sealing the moment with something words couldn't fully capture. But then, slowly, he took a step back, straightened his shoulders, and turned to face everyone in the room. His voice carried a weight that made everyone pay attention. I want all of you to hear this, he began. From today onward, she is not just my son's wife. She is my daughter, and I will protect her, guide her, and stand by her exactly as I would for my own child. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of someone sniffling in the corner. My queen stood there, her hands clasped together, her eyes starting to brim again. Dad walked over to the middle of the room and asked her to join him there. When she did, he looked around at everyone, uncles, cousins, family friends, and said, I've seen people treat their daughters-in-law like strangers for years, but that will never happen here. If anyone ever dares to hurt her, they will have to answer to me first. A quiet murmur went through the room, not because anyone doubted his words, but because they knew he meant every single one. Then he looked back at her, his eyes softer now. Daughter, I want you to promise me something too, he said. Promise me you'll never hesitate to come to me with anything. If you're hurt, if you're happy, if you just need someone to listen, I want to be that person for you. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I promise, Father. The word father rolled off her tongue again, and this time my dad's face broke into a wide smile, the kind that made the deep lines on his cheeks more visible. Someone in the room quietly clapped, and then another joined in, until the entire space was filled with applause. It wasn't a celebration of an event or a ceremony, it was a celebration of a bond that had just been made official in the most heartfelt way. My dad turned to me for a moment, and there was a look in his eyes I'll never forget, a mix of pride, relief, and pure joy. Then he looked back at her and said, From this day forward, your place in this family is unshakable. She lowered her head slightly in respect, but I could see the smile tugging at her lips. And in that moment, I realized something. That moment, as I stood there watching them, it hit me like a wave. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about two worlds coming together, about a bridge being built between two hearts that had never crossed paths before, but were now tied forever. I could see it in her eyes, that look of relief and belonging. For so long, she had carried her own battles, walked her own roads, and faced life without the kind of family embrace my dad had just given her. And now, right in front of everyone, she was no longer the outsider. She was one of us. I noticed her subtly inch closer to him, almost as if she didn't want that feeling of safety to fade. Dad noticed it too, and without saying a word, he put his arm around her shoulders. It was such a simple move, but in it was the unspoken promise. You are safe here. You are home. I felt my throat tighten. I'd grown up seeing my dad as a strong man, someone who rarely showed too much emotion. But now, I was seeing a side of him I hadn't witnessed often, a side that was willing to wear his heart on his sleeve for someone who had just stepped into his life not too long ago. Then he glanced at me with a knowing smile, almost as if to say, Son, I approve, you've chosen well. But what really shook me was what happened next. Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded cloth. It was old, the edges worn, and I knew exactly what it was. It was the same handkerchief he had carried in his pocket on my mother's wedding day decades ago. Without a word, he handed it to her. She hesitated at first, looking at him like she wasn't sure if she should take it. But he gently placed it in her hand and said quietly, "This is yours now. Keep it with you. It's for when happy tears come, or when you need to feel that you're not alone." Her lips trembled as she held on to it tightly. I looked around and saw my cousins and uncles watching in stunned silence. They might not have understood the full meaning of what they were seeing, but I did. That wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of welcome, of trust, of love, passing from one generation to the next. And in that instant, I knew my queen's bond with my dad had just been sealed forever. After that moment, with the handkerchief, the room seemed to shift. The air felt lighter, warmer, as if something unspoken had been resolved. But my queen wasn't done surprising everyone. She gently held the handkerchief in her hands, looked at Dad with those deep, honest eyes, and said softly, "I'll take care of this, and I'll take care of you too." That was it. Dad tried to smile, but his chin trembled, and a tear slid down his cheek before he could stop it. You could almost hear the collective gasp in the room, because it's rare to see him cry in front of others. Yet there he was, wiping his eyes, not caring about pride or image. Then, out of nowhere, Dad stood up, walked over to where the family photo wall was, and took down one of the empty frames he'd kept for years. He'd always said that frame was waiting for something special, and without asking anyone's opinion,